Some movie characters have all the luck. Not only do they get to save the day in dashing fashion, get the love interest and live on in cinema history, but they also get to, well, live. That's more than can be said for these 10 unfortunate souls. Sometimes characters die at the end of a long quest or after an epic battle for the fate of the world, others though they just get knocked off because the writers wanted to make the audience cry. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com and these are 10 movie characters who were only there to die. Number 10. Winston Havelock, the Mummy. Despite being on screen for less time than it takes to say tea and crumpets, Captain Winston Havelock made quite the impression on viewers of 1999's The Mummy. An RAF pilot and friend of protagonist Rick, Havelock is your typical nutty Englishman complete with enormous moustache and penchant for classical music. Winston is brought in by Rick and company to help in their mission to rescue Evelyn. He manages to catch the group up with Imhotep in the air, but his plane is brought down by the reborn villain's magic. The plane crashes into what we later discover is quicksand. Rick, Jonathan and Ardith survive the crash, but the eccentric pilot does not. He and his trusty aircraft then sink into the ground, never to be seen again. Winston's death is still impactful despite his limited screen time. Actor Bernard Fox does a fantastic job in making him a fleshed out and likeable character, even if he did only have about 5 minutes to do so. At least Winston didn't live long enough to see that god-awful reboot in 2017. That's a fate 1,000 times worse than Quicksand. Number 9. The Guy. Spy Kids 3D, game over. In terms of great moments per second, Elijah Wood might genuinely have a better score playing for Spy Kids 3D than he does with The Lord of the Rings. This youth-based espionage flick is all about protagonist Junie Cortez and his hunt for his missing sister Carmen. To get her back, Junie must navigate a virtual reality video game designed by his sister's captor, the Toymaker. Elijah Wood comes into this when Junie and his friends reach the supposedly unbeatable level 5. Our hero is convinced throughout the movie that he is the guy, a character designed specifically to beat level 5. However, Wood appears silversuit and all to tell Junie that it is him who is the real guy. After a rousing pep talk, the guy leads the kids into level 5, only to be immediately electrocuted and die. The build-up and payoff of this scene is tremendous, and the guy's failed act of bravado is really funny. Wood's character was there for the sole purpose of this joke and to prove that Junie was actually the guy after all. Number 8. Paige Tico, The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi split its audience in half like they would Darth Maul. If we get into why, then we won't have any time left for the rest of this list, so let's just focus on a character who doesn't live past the opening 30 minutes. Paige Tico is a resistance soldier who is part of a doomed bombing run led by everyone's favourite flying himbo, Poe Dameron. Poe decides to go against Leia's orders and attempt to destroy a First Order dreadnought, only to get basically everyone involved in the raid killed. At least Paige achieved something with her dying actions, releasing the bombs that would destroy the dreadnought. This death needed to happen for 2 reasons. Firstly, Paige needed to be sympathetic in order to drive home Poe's failure. Secondly, her death was required in order to motivate her sister Rose, one of the main protagonists of the film. Although considering Rose's almost total absence from The Rise of Skywalker, maybe this was a needless sacrifice. Number 7. Bill Murray, Zombieland. Ghostbusters, Groundhog Day, Caddyshack, Lost in Translation, anything directed by Wes Anderson, Bill Murray has his fingerprint across a lot of great cinema. One of his briefest yet most brilliant roles came in 2009's Zombieland, wherein he plays himself. Woody Harrelson's Tallahassee and Emma Stone's Wichita stumble across Murray hiding out in his mansion, where he has survived the outbreak of the mad zombie disease. He's made himself up to look like a zombie to avoid drawing the attention of real flesh eaters, but this cosplay eventually leads to his downfall. The star goes to play a prank on Jesse Eisenberg's Columbus and Abigail Breslin's Little Rock, sneaking up on them as if he were a zombie, which backfires horribly when Columbus accidentally shoots him dead. Making practical jokes during an apocalypse probably should have been one of Columbus's rules. From the moment Murray turned up as himself, it was clear that he was going to die in some funny way. The cameo is a brief but welcome addition to the movie, one that helped elevate it to modern classic status. Number 6. Chrissy Watkins, Jaws. Every great horror movie should start with someone getting picked off by the big bad. This could have been a list populated with just those characters, but we've decided to limit our choices to just 2. The first of said unlucky first victims is Chrissy Watkins, played by Susan Backlini. Chrissy is an attractive young woman who does what all attractive young women in horror movies about water do. She decides to go drunkenly skinny dipping in the middle of the night. Because that always works out so well. Naturally, Chrissy's dip turns out to be her last. Through the famous shark eye view shots, we see the girl being stalked by the sharp-toothed terror before she is eventually dragged underwater to her gruesome demise. Backlini perfectly gets the phrase "maximise your minutes" in this scene. She knows she's not in the movie for very long, but she puts her whole self into her performance, and in doing so creates one of the most iconic movie openings of all time. Number 5. Casey Becker, Scream. Our final woman who dies at the beginning of a horror movie is another all-time classic, Drew Barrymore's Casey Becker from 1996's Scream. Becker is another archetypal teenager who gets herself in a whole heap of trouble whilst home alone. She answers the phone to a random caller who begins questioning her on famous horror movies. When Casey gets a question wrong, the killer kills her boyfriend, who is bound and gagged outside the house. See kids, it does pay to sit indoors and watch movies all day. Casey then tries to flee the house but is cornered by Ghostface. He quickly dispatches the teen and hangs her body from a tree for her parents to find when they arrive home. Well, at least she didn't throw a party. Although she only clocked up 12 minutes of screen time, Casey Becker and her death scene have gone down in horror movie history as one of the best ever. Number 4. Murren Mcclano, Braveheart. With a name that might as well be "Look at me, I'm Scottish," Murren Mcclano is the first love interest for the hero in Braveheart. Mel Gibson's tartan-tinged historical drama tells the story of Scottish folk hero William Wallace, who we're sure Scottish people were thrilled to see played by an Australian. Wallace famously led an uprising against English occupiers in the 13th century. If this film is to be believed, it all went down because his girlfriend got her throat slit. Murren Mcclano, who was played by Catherine McCormack, was a childhood friend of Wallace who later fell in love with him. The pair were married and looked forward to living a happy life together until her neck cheated on him with a knife. Mcclano's death effectively kicks off the events of the movie. Without her, Wallace wouldn't have been spurred into action and the rebellion never would have taken place. The fact that Wallace was motivated by her murder isn't surprising. The death of a female loved one is a well-worn trope in cinema. Number 3. Vanessa Deadpool 2. Ah yes, speaking of which, if you haven't seen the first Deadpool film, then it's basically all about the titular anti-hero trying to return to his girlfriend Vanessa. After much trial and tribulation, the lovers are reunited and settle into their new life together. Until Vanessa gets killed right at the beginning of the sequel. After spending almost 2 hours of our time watching him try to get her back, Wade Wilson loses his beloved about 10 minutes into his second outing. Vanessa was killed off just to give Deadpool's character an extra edge, an ignoble end for a character that had so much to offer. Women often get a bad time in comic book media, and the casual discarding of Vanessa's character is no exception. This blatant disregard for her turned a lot of people off of Deadpool 2 and the franchise itself. Number 2. Uncle Ben, Spider-Man. Death is very rarely permanent in superhero media. Despite the outrage to it, even Vanessa came back to life. There are a few deaths so fundamental to comic book lore that they can never be undone though. One is the demise of Bruce Wayne's parents, and another is the murder of Peter Parker's Uncle Ben. We're focusing on the Raimi films though, as Webb's versions of events was a retreading of established ground. Cliff Robertson's version of the character is a stern yet caring father figure who clearly loves Peter. His death at the hands of Flint Marko sets in motion the events of the following 3 movies. Uncle Ben was literally just there to die because he is one of, if not the most important doomed characters in all of popular modern fiction. Now that's a great responsibility. Number 1. Ellie Frederickson, Up. The opening segment of Up is dedicated entirely to the lives of Carl and Ellie Frederickson. We watch them meet as children, start a life together, go through the ups and downs of said life before an older Ellie becomes sick and eventually succumbs to illness. Her death is like a dagger through the heart, and that dagger is made of crying. Most of us can relate to a grandparent or an older relative losing a significant other and then completely shutting down. That's exactly what happens with Carl until he decides to have one last adventure in his late wife's honour. The weaponised sadness of Up is one of the most brutal openings to a film ever, but it is completely necessary to its story. Ellie's death and its aftermath reminds us all that there is life after tragedy, and it's actually a proper feel-good story, even if it does make us cry like a fountain in the first 10 minutes. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. And did any of these deaths catch you off guard at first, and now you look at them and kind of go, yeah, that makes sense actually? And of course, let us know of any more like this that we missed. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for What Culture, and have a good week.